The games were over. It had been around 2 months since it ended. 2 months since the betrayal and the bloodshed were left behind. It was strange, really. Just how quickly life could turn from one extreme to the next. One day you were fighting for survival, and the next you were folding laundry and wondering if you had enough groceries for the week. The modest apartment you now called home was small but cozy, with a tiny kitchen and a living room cluttered with toys and 2 bedrooms. It wasn't much, but it was safe. After the games, the only thing you and Thanos wanted to do was provide a normal life for your 3-year-old son, Kai. Kai, come on, it's bedtime, you called, leaning against the doorway to your living room. The boy was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by little toy cars and building blocks. His dark curls bounced as he looked up at you with an impish grin. 5 more minutes, he pleaded, holding up his tiny hand as if he was bargaining with an option. You sighed, but the smile tugging at your lips betrayed your stern tone. No negotiations. Let's go. Kai pouted, his big eyes trying to sway you, but you stood firm. Before he could protest further, Thanos entered his room, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire space. You heard, Thanos said, crossing his arms, raising his eyebrows. Up. Now. Kai groaned dramatically, but began gathering up his toys. Okay. It was mornings like these that felt surreal. Seeing Thanos acting like a dad and helping Kai into his pajamas or brushing his teeth was something you thought you'd never imagined back at the games. He had been your enemy once, a cold, calculating force of nature, but now he was just a man, a father and a partner in navigating this new chapter of your life. Once Kai was ready, you tucked him into a small bed, the dinosaur padded blanket pulled snugly up to his chin. His sleepy eyes blinked up at you as you sat beside him, stroking his curls. Story time? He murmured, already halfway to dreamland. He glanced over at your shoulder at Thanos, who was leaning against the doorway. Watching with a small smirk, he gave you a subtle nod. Okay, he said softly, picking up a well-worn book from the nightstand. But just one. You need to go to sleep. Kai hummed contentedly as you began to read. Your voice was quiet and soothing. Thanos stayed in the doorway. His presence was comforting in its steadiness. By the time you had finished the story, Kai was fast asleep, his little chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. He leaned down to press a firm kiss to his forehead, whispering a "Good night, little one." Thanos stepped forward, his movements surprisingly gentle for someone so imposing. He adjusted the blanket around for Kai, placing a hand on your shoulder. Come on, he murmured. Let's get some sleep too. The two of you left, closing the door just enough to leave a slither of light shining through. The night was quiet. The weight of the day seemed to settle into your shoulders. The world outside was still recovering from the horrors of the games and lives lost, but here in this tiny apartment that you'd carved out, a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the three of you could just be, a place where it was quiet and calm. You padded into your shared bedroom, pulling the covers on and collapsing onto the bed. Thanos followed, the mattress dipping under his weight as he settled beside you. Long day? He asked, voice laced with a rough exhaustion. You nodded, staring up at the ceiling. Always is, but it's worth it. He turned his head to look at you, his sharp features sharpening in the dim light. It is, he agreed. For a moment, the silence stretched on between the two of you, comfortable and familiar. He reached out, your fingers brushing against his as he intertwined them without hesitation. Do you ever think about it? You asked, quietly, your voice barely able to whisper. The games? You nodded, your gaze fixed on the ceiling. Just, like, everything we went through, everything that was lost. Thanos was quiet for a long time, his thumb absentmindedly brushing against the back of your hand. Sometimes, he admitted, but not as much as I thought I would. You turned your head to look at him, your brows furrowing in curiosity. Why not? You asked. His gaze met yours, steady and unwavering. Because I have you. And Kai, and that's what matters now, not the past. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made your chest ache. You squeezed his hand, your voice trembling as you said, I'm glad we made it out together. So am I, he replied, leaning in and pressing a soft kiss to your forehead. The tenderness of his touch was something you were still getting used to. It was hard to reconcile this version of Thanos, the man who held your hand and kissed your forehead, with that ruthless competitor you'd known in the games. But as you lie beside him, the warmth grounding you, you knew that this was truly who he was. Get some sleep, he murmured, his deep voice rumbling in your ear. We've got another long day tomorrow. You nodded, letting your eyes drift shut. The sound of the night, the hum of the refrigerator in the distance murmuring into the traffic. The distance faded into the background. You just let yourself relax. For the first time in what felt like forever, you felt at peace. The games were now behind you. The future was uncertain as it might be, but something you could face together. As you drifted off to sleep, your head was still intertwined with Delos' hand. You couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, you found your happy ending after all. The soft light of the early morning filtered through the curtains. You stood at the stove, the smell of sizzling eggs and toast filling the modest kitchen. The apartment was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator. The faint clicking of the utensils was peaceful, a stark contrast to the life you'd once known. Kai, your 3-year-old son, sat at the small dining table, swinging his legs as he watched you cook. His hair was a mess of dark curls given to him by his father. Not that you could tell, since Thanos' hair was bright purple now. His tiny fist clutched a toy car that he refused to part with even during mealtime. Mama, he called out, his voice sweet and curious. You hummed, flipping the eggs onto a plate. Why don't I have a brother or a sister? The question caught you completely off guard. Your hand froze mid-motion as you processed his words. Turning to look at him, you saw his big, innocent little eyes staring back at you, full of genuine curiosity. Well, you started, carefully placing his breakfast on the table. That's not exactly something you can just ask for, Kai. But why? He pressed, poking his eggs with his fork. You hesitated, unsure of how exactly you could explain something so complex to a 3-year-old. It's, complicated. It's complicated, you said, finally sitting across from him. Kai didn't seem satisfied with your answer. He furrowed his lit brows and looked down at his plate. I want a sibling, he declared ferbly, as if that alone would make it happen. Before you could even respond, a low chuckle echoed from behind you. He glanced over your shoulder to see Thanos, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed and a smirk on his lips. Do you now? He drawled out, his voice laced with amusement. Yes, Kai nodded enthusiastically, his curls bouncing. I want someone to play with, the boy whined. Thanos pushed off the doorframe, walking over to ruffle Kai's hair. It's not that simple, kid, he said, sitting down beside you. He turned his big pleading eyes to you. But why not? Your face felt like it was on fire, and Thanos' smirk only grew wider. He was clearly enjoying this much more than he should have been. You stammered, glancing at Thanos for some help, but he just raised an eyebrow, clearly waiting to see how you'd handle this. Having a sibling takes time. you said, finally, trying to keep your voice steady. It's not like something that could just happen overnight. Kai tilted his head, considering this. How long? You sighed, rubbing the back of your neck. A while, Kai. It's not just about time. A lot of things have to happen first. Like what? You opened your mouth and closed it, realizing you've kind of cornered yourself into a box, not really sure on how to answer without getting a territory that was not to be explained to a toddler. Ask again in about 10 years. Then a deep voice tinged with humor. Kai pouted, clearly unimpressed with this lack of concrete answers. But I want one now, he whined, crossing his arms. Thanos chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Patience. Good things come to those who wait. Kai did not look even utterly convinced. He pushed his plate away slightly, resting his chin on his hands. I bet the other kids have brothers and sisters. He reached across the table, nudging his plate back towards him. Maybe they do, but everyone is different. And besides, you got us, isn't that enough? Kai considered this for a moment before shaking his head. Nope. I want someone my size to play with. You and Daddy are too big. Thanos smirked at the way Kai referred to him so confidently. It was a far cry from the cold, distant man he used to be. But hearing it never failed to soften the edges of his usually stoic demeanor. Well, Kai, you said, trying to redirect the conversation. Why don't you finish your breakfast first and we'll talk about it later? But no buts. Thanos interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. Eat your food. Kai grumbled under his breath, but eventually picked up his fork and stabbing at his eggs with dramatic flair. You shot Thanos a grateful look, but the smirk didn't budge. What? You asked, narrowing your eyes at him. Nothing, he said, though the amusement in his voice told you it really wasn't nothing. You rolled your eyes at the attention, turning back to your own plate. It's not funny, you murmured. Oh, it's a little funny, he countered, leaning onto you. He's got a point, you know. You choked on your bite of toast, reaching for a glass of water. Excuse me? You sputtered. Thanos shrugged, his smirk almost softening. I'm just saying, kids got good instincts. Maybe it's something we should think about. Your face went red again, and you looked away, focusing intently on your food. You're impossible. And yet, here we are, he said, leaning back into his chair with a satisfied grin. Kai finished his breakfast, hopping down from his chair and running off to play in the living room. You sighed in relief, grateful for the temporary relief. But as you cleared the table, Thanos' words lingered in your mind. Was it something to think about? The idea of expanding your little family? I mean, it wasn't entirely unappealing. You'd built a good life, but you never thought you'd have one filled with love and safety. Maybe a sibling for Kai wouldn't be such a far-fetched idea after all. Still, you weren't about to admit to Thanos. Not yet, anyway. You're quiet, he said, his voice pulling you from your thoughts. Just thinking. You replied, glancing at him. About what? You hesitated, but shook your head. Nothing. Don't worry about it. He gave you a knowing look, but didn't press on further. Instead, he stood and began helping you with the dishes, his presence a steady comfort as the two of you worked side by side. As the morning light grew brighter and the sounds of Kai's laughter echoed through the living room, you couldn't help but feel grateful. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was yours, and that was more than enough. For now. The soft glow of the morning light spilled into your bedroom, hallowing the broad, powerful frame of Thanos as he lay drooped beside you. His arm was over your waist, his touch was firm, but teasing as his fingers traced lazy patterns across your skin. It was the next morning. You know, he murmured, your voice soft but carrying that playful edge. Kai has been asking some interesting questions. Thanos raised an eyebrow, and the corner of his mouth tilted into a smirk. Oh? About what? You rolled over to face him, your fingers grazing his chest. Siblings? You said, biting your lip as your eyes met his. His smirk deepened as he leaned in closer, his voice a low rumble. Is that so? You nodded, your cheeks warming under his intense gaze. He wants a little brother or a sister. Thanos' hand slid down your waist, pulling you closer until your bodies were completely pressed together. And what do you want? He asked, his voice rich with suggestion, his lips brushing against the shell of your ear. Your breath hitched as your fingers began to curl into his chest. Maybe, you started. Maybe you should give him what he wants. His deep chuckle sent shivers in your spine. He shifted to hover over you, his eyes dark with intent. Careful what you wish for, he murmured, his lips ghosting over yours. Because I don't do anything halfway. Good, you whispered, pulling him down to a kiss. Because neither do I.